Which players should you be watching out for on the Ontario Reign, and which guys might be reaching the end of their time in a Kings and or Reign uniform? We're going to look at all of that today on Locked On Los Angeles Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey everyone, my name is Sarah Avampato, host of this show, Locked On Los Angeles Kings, talking about your favorite hockey team and mine, the Ontario Reign, also the Los Angeles Kings. Thank you for listening to today's show and making this show your first listen of the day. Every day we are, of course, free and available on all podcast platforms. You can also find the show and stream it and listen to it on YouTube. And I don't know, like satellite brainwave party time. I don't know. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. On today's show, it's a little bit of a continuation of a conversation I had started last week with Jay Forster of Locked On Blue Jackets, also of Field Pass Hockey, covering the Ontario Reign. He and I sat down last week to talk about the Reign's hot start to the season, the incredibly exciting power play, and also the very exciting Jordan Spence. If you missed that show, you can go check it out from last week. Yesterday, you also heard from Jay as we looked at the Kings' weekend activities and their big wins, but I wanted to have him back on to look at the Reign because, as we've already discussed on this show, the Reign are fun and good and one of the best teams in the AHL this season, and we're excited to see where they can take things this year in the league. So, on today's show, we're looking at some players who we love, but maybe the Kings don't love quite so much anymore. We're going to look at some players who probably should be on the Kings, but they're not. And what does that mean for them? And how much longer do they have before Rob Blake and company ship them out because they're not part of the Kings' plans anymore? We're also going to look a little bit at who should be getting called up, what we have to look forward to, and all sorts of other cool stuff. So without further ado, let's throw it back on over to Jay as we talk all about the Reign. I know one of the players that, you know, Kings fans, well, really there's a couple of them now who Kings fans are just sort of like, what are we doing with these guys? And that is Alex Turcotte and Gabe Vilardi, who I feel like are both kind of, you know, similar paths, different points in their careers. But, you know, Vilardi kind of struggled in the NHL. It feels like Todd McClellan didn't really quite know what to do with him. It seemed like they not rushed him maybe, but he could have used maybe a little more time in the AHL before they brought him up. And then now, you know, here we are, he's back. And then Turcotte has just had such a weird start to his professional career, signed a contract thinking he was going to play the end of the season in the AHL, and then COVID happened and canceled it. So he'd left college, so he couldn't go back to college, but he had no professional team to play in. And then last year he spent a lot of time being injured. This year he's had some injuries. He finally got to make his NHL debut, but I think they're both players who, you know, we're looking at who's on the roster now, who's going to be fighting for spots and trying to figure out like where they fit in. What are they doing to like distinguish themselves in the AHL? Do you think that there is a place for them in the Kings, or is this kind of a like, we should start looking at what we could maybe get for them, or like not be too sad if they get traded or something?
Yeah, it is. It's a tough one, especially with Chokar, because I was always really high on Alex Chokar. Obviously, he had a really good World Juniors a couple of seasons ago, you know, and he was a player that I was super excited to kind of look at in more detail this season, and he hasn't really ever been able to kind of get it going. He's only got 18 points so far this season. He's only played 26 games due to, you know, injury. And it is a shame because I do think he is a good player, but unfortunately he has kind of been leapfrogged a little bit as a potential player. And he's a player that I think you want to be playing in the top six. You know, he's kind of wasted in the bottom six of the Kings organization, I think. So he's a player that I would not be surprised to see him in a different jersey next season. Gabe Valadi is a much more interesting option to me. He, again, is a guy that's kind of been pushed down the lineup a little bit, especially, you know, with Quentin Byfield making his NHL debut and looking pretty at home up there. And then, the Jaret Anderson-Dolan has been just phenomenal this season for the AHL. I really, really want to see Anderson-Dolan make the NHL and stick it out, because I do think he can be a really, really good middle six guy for them. Gabe Valadi, again, he's such a strange player, because he is good. He's a very good player, but for whatever reason, I don't know if it's like you say, I don't know if Tom McClellan didn't know what to do with him, whether he didn't quite fit into the Kings system. He started the season with the Kings, I believe, and then got sent down. And yeah, like it seems to be clicking for him in the AHL, but for whatever reason, maybe Todd McClellan just doesn't like him, or I'm not sure what's going on. But I mean, he had 2 goals in Saturday's game, both of them on the power play. So he's clearly a very capable player, a very good goal scorer. He's, I think, 4th on the team in goals right now. But I don't know that there's room for him on the Kings roster as it stands. It'll be interesting to see kind of what happens around about the trade deadline or the end of the season, when, there is some roster shake-up and maybe some older contracts come off the books, or, older guys retire, someone leaves, who knows what's going to happen. And maybe that will be kind of his chance to take another stab at it. But right now, I mean, he's maybe 5th or 6th on the team in terms of who I would call up personally. So, which is a shame, because I do genuinely like him. I do genuinely think he's a good player, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, his development has stalled, or he's hit the ceiling that he's going to hit. Maybe he will just be a really good AHL player, which is, not the worst thing in the world. But he has not been the player that the Kings needed him to be this season, I don't think.
Yeah, and it is frustrating, because you see those glimpses of him, scored his first goal in the NHL in like historically fast fashion. You see him scoring all these power play goals with the Reign, and like, that there's a good player in there. It's just the consistency was a struggle at the NHL level. I think that he isn't the fastest, he isn't the best skater, but I think he's smart enough to be able to work around that. And he definitely has always struck me as a guy who just, I feel like whenever we've talked about like the injury problems he's had and everything, my take on it was always like, have you ever tried to tell a 17, 18, 19-year-old boy to do something? Because they're not going to listen to you until they realize that you were right, and that's going to take a long time. And I feel like there's a lot of that in Gabe Vilardi. Like, they've sort of, like, reading between the lines, have even kind of said like, yeah, we told him this is what he needs to do. He didn't do it. And so now everything has taken longer. And then he realized, oh, I should have been doing the thing. And I think that also is probably factoring into it, of just his attitude needs to. And usually when I say a player needs to have a better attitude, I mean like they're mopey, or they're not handling things professionally. I think he's handling things professionally. I think he just needs to like realize like, oh, if a coach is telling you need to go work on face-offs, that means you need to go work on face-offs. You don't get to just like be like, it's going to be fine. And I wonder if maybe they're waiting to see more of that maturity from him in terms of being more coachable, which I hate that as a phrase, but it is kind of true. Like, if a coach tells you need to go work on this thing, or here's why you're doing a thing, it kind of is how it is. But yeah, I think he's such a fun player, but just, I don't know how he fits in to the Kings system at this point. More coming up after this, but first, BetOnline is here to help you with your sports betting excitement. Football is, of course, over for the season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props, to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And of course, it isn't just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, plus much more. Head over to the website today, or use your mobile device to learn more all about the sports trends and action. BetOnline, it is where the game starts. All right. Thank you, of course, for making Locked On Los Angeles Kings your first listen of the day. For your next listen, go and check out the Locked On Now podcast. You can get quick hits, nightly recaps of every NHL game with analysis from all of our local experts across the network. You've heard from basically all of them on this show talking about their teams, and now you can keep up with the latest news in the league in a quick hit format from the Locked On NHL from the Locked On Now podcast. The show is, of course, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including on YouTube. So go check it out at Locked On Now. Now, let's head back to talking with Jay about the Reign. And yeah, Jaret Anderson-Dolan, I don't know how we get him back to the NHL, but he needs to be there. Like, he's just such a, I just like him. I just think
he's wasted on the Reign, I think, which feels like a weird thing to say because I absolutely love watching him play. I'm so lucky that I get to cover this team of this, this top line of Turcotte and Anderson-Dolan. Just it's such a treat. He needs to be in the NHL somewhere, and I don't know how they make him fit onto the Kings roster because again, he's a guy that needs to play in the top 6. Maybe when Dustin Brown finally crumbles to dust, he will get an opportunity. But if he is on the Ontario Reign next season, that's
right.
That's such a waste to me. Yeah. I want to see him in the NHL. He's good enough to be in the NHL. I don't know. It's so frustrating because again, love to watch him, love to cover him. He's better than the team that he's playing on.
Yeah, and I feel like he feels. I mean, any of those guys, him, Vilardi. I mean, even Ferk, it feels kind of like it's like always like, oh, that was our trade deadline acquisition of, the team makes some moves and, oh, now they've got a room for someone else. And one of those guys comes up. I really hope Anderson-Dolan particularly that they find a place for him. And I know they wanted him to, he was a little bit of a victim of the numbers game in that he was basically the only guy they could assign to the AHL without having to put through waivers at the beginning of the season. When they needed to get their roster down. But I know they wanted him to work on offense, and he has certainly been providing that. So I'm like, all right, come on, he's doing it. Let's get him back up.
And it obviously, it's difficult because he does play center. Obviously, the center role on the team is kind of solidified right now with Kopitar, Deno, Byfield. Call him up, play him on the wing. Why are you playing, for example, Lias Anderson, who I like a lot? I don't understand how he's on the Kings roster above guys like Anderson-Dolan. Brendan Lemieux, every time he's on the ice, just makes me want to scream. Even if you get past the biting thing, he's not good.
No.
His numbers are terrible. His underlying stats are terrible. The eye test is bad. He was having some success for a while I believe he's on a line with Blake Lizotte, and those two seem to have some success together. But man, when you've got guys like Ferk, Tynan, Anderson-Dolan, Vilardi playing their heart out in the AHL, and I think that's another thing about Vilardi is I think he's responded really well to being sent down. Yeah. Because I'm sure I listened to an episode of Locked On Kings where you talked about how the important thing is how he responds to being sent down, and whether because some guys get sent down and sulk and their production drops, or in the case of, for example, this happened with the Blue Jackets at the start of the season. We sent Mikko Lehtinen, a defenseman who we picked up in a trade last season. He got sent down to the AHL and basically refused to report, so they were like, okay, cool, bye. Got rid of his contract and now he's playing in Europe somewhere, but it's that obviously is a big red flag in how a prospect responds. Valadi seems to have taken his lumps, shall we say, has gone down to the AHL, has clearly, worked pretty hard at picking himself back up, and he seems like he is doing all of the right things to be noticed. That's a really key thing in Veladi's development. But at the same time, if I'm Gabe Valadi and I'm watching Brendan Lemieux skate around on the ice like a Buick every game, I'm mad as hell.
Yeah. I just now I'm imagining like a car with like a King's helmet on it, which is just a really, really funny picture.
Someone used it to describe the way Jack Johnson skates once, and now it's my favorite.
That's
my
so
favorite
good.
thing to say.
I love it. That is so good. Are there any other players who might be kind of going under the radar for Kings fans who they should be paying special attention to while they're watching Reign games?
One guy for me is Samuel Fagemo, who has played most of the time in Ontario. He's the guy that I really noticed in Kings preseason. He has he's got 15 goals so far this season, which is good for third on the Kings. Excuse me, third on the Reign, and again, just a really fun guy to watch. Gets a ton of power play time. Of his 15 goals, 4 of those have been on the power play. Likes to shoot the puck a lot, not quite as much as Martin Ferk, who I've just noticed has over 100 shots so far this season. But he's a guy that, again, if for whatever reason you don't want to call up Tynan or Ferk or Anderson-Dolan, which the Kings don't apparently, he's a guy that I could see maybe getting a call if you want, someone that can play on the third or fourth line. Because, again, you don't want Anderson-Dolan playing on the fourth line. It's pointless. But a guy like Samuel Fagemo, I could see making a decent impact. And again, play him instead of Lemieux. Why not? He's not going to be worse. I feel like I've spent a lot of time just crapping on Brendan Lemieux, but in my defense, he deserves it.
Yeah, I feel like they just need because I know half of the reason he's on the roster is because he's not afraid to fight people or bite them apparently. I'm like, I just need one other guy who can actually play to also decide that he can anyone who has listened to the show for any amount of time knows that I could live without hockey fighting. If they got rid of it tomorrow, I'd be like, okay, fine. But I get it that that's still a quality that people look for and that coaches look for and teammates look up to and whatever. I'm like, I just need one guy to decide he's okay with being punchy, but also decide he's okay with being a good hockey player. Just one, please.
Yes. And I mean, I have complicated feelings about fighting in hockey that I will not get into now because I feel like that's an entire other podcast episode or 3. But I don't know. I understand the need for there to be someone with that hashtag grit that's willing to fight. But yeah, why can't they also be good at hockey? Or just find someone big and use them as a deterrent. I get that you're oh, he's willing to fight, but if you're scary enough,
right,
you don't need to fight.
Right. I mean, Curtis McDermott wasn't a good hockey player, but he certainly fit that category of he's just big and
no one would want to fight him,
right? Because he's enormous, and now he's enormous for the Avalanche, which is still really funny.
Noted fourth line right wing Curtis McDermott is still
totally normal.
God, it's so good. I get a good chuckle every time I think about it. Yeah, but just really Brendan Lemieux is kind of, it's like he wants to play that Brad Marchand role, but he doesn't have the same talent as Brad Marchand, so he's just kind of a weasel.
Right, or it's don't want to say anything nice about Tom Wilson, but Tom Wilson is in the same category as Marchand of he doesn't have to do all of that garbage stuff because he's a good hockey player. He just does the garbage stuff anyway. Yeah, if you cut all of that out, you're still a guy that no one is going to want to mess with because you're 6'4" and enormous. Right. Yeah, you don't have to go out there and try to maim people. Right.
You're Brendan Lemieux is out here all he has is biting.
Right.
not to
right
condone it, but that's
kind of
that's his primary skill in this game is being a weasel and biting people. So why not? I don't know. Just it's so frustrating. Sit him, make him sit down somewhere in the press box and play a player that can play hockey. Yeah.
What is your outlook or prediction for the rest of the season for the Reign as they ease their way on in towards the playoffs?
Well, it's a bit of a strange one because I believe only the top team in the Pacific gets a bye to the first round. Currently, they're 2 points out of first place, so it's between them and Stockton, and there really isn't anyone to challenge that. The Stockton Heat have 58 points so far this season. The Ontario Reign have 56. Third place is the Bakersfield Condors, who have 45 points this season.
Oh, well.
So there is an 11-point gap between second and third place in the division. So honestly, I think it is perfectly reasonable that the Ontario Reign could win this division if they can beat Stockton at any point. I believe they're two. I looked this up and forgot. I believe they are 2-1 against Stockton so far this season, which is not bad, but needs to be better if they want to take that first round bye. That being said, the Ontario Reign is a legitimately very, very good hockey team. It reminds me a little bit of the Cleveland Monsters, or they were the Lake Erie Monsters in 2015. Like, that team was just unreal. And I kind of get the same vibes from the Ontario Reign. And I do, at the risk of, I'm just going to knock on some wood, at the risk of jinxing myself, this is a team that could win the Calder. I would not be surprised to see them just absolutely blow through the playoffs. And the final four for the Calder could legitimately be Ontario, Chicago, Utica, and probably Stockton. I don't know how the seeding would work in that regard, but like that could be Utica or Chicago versus Ontario could be a legitimate Calder Cup final, which would be just so much fun.
Yeah, I my dream matchup. I think that Chicago Ontario would be like the Western Conference final. That is actually kind of my dream matchup, because then I could actually cover the whole thing from both sides of it. But yeah, I mean, it's so fun and refreshing to see the Reign as a team who people are legitimately looking at as I almost said Stanley Cup, but that's the wrong one, as a Calder Cup threat, that like they're a team that you can't just, roll over. And it'll be interesting. Obviously we don't get to see really any of the East Coast, the Eastern Division teams. So, if it does come down to the Rainer in the final, it's going to be a team that none of us have seen before. And yeah, it's probably going to be Utica, unless something really.
I mean, stranger things have happened. It might not be Utica. I am still riding high on Columbus, Tampa Bay in 2019. Going to be riding high on that for the rest of my life. But yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to look at the final and be like, right, we have no idea.
Yeah, what to expect.
What this team is like because of the way the AHL functioned. I was really surprised to see them in Grand Rapids last weekend. I was writing a game recap preview or whatever, and I was like, oh, where are they playing? What's next week look like? And I was like, they are in Michigan this weekend. I guess.
Yeah. I feel like every so often, I feel like once a season they'll take one trip out to the Midwest and play a Central Division team. I feel like usually they play Texas, which they're all bad travel, but they've definitely played Rockford in the past. They played Chicago, they've played Milwaukee, they played Iowa, which is all great for me because I will drive, basically anywhere except for Manitoba or Texas, I'll drive to in the Central Division. But yeah, Grand Rapids, I was like, oh, you haven't played here before. Okay, cool. Well, at least before in like my time of being able to drive out to Grand Rapids. But I was like, oh, okay, neat. And that kind of stuff I think will be fixed next season, I think, when the AHL goes to more sort of NHL-ish scheduling of every division is actually going to play the same amount of games, unlike the way it is now. So who knows? I might actually get to go on more Reign road trips and not just be like, oh, Grand Rapids. Okay, great.
Just one weekend in the middle of Michigan.
Yeah, not? Very random. Very random. Do you have any parting thoughts for Kings fans about the Reign as we wrap things up today?
I do not think so. I think I have ranted about everything that I was going to rant about.
I like it.
And some I wasn't expecting to. So,
well, that is what I'm here for. That is what I always try to facilitate with guests. Thank you, as always, for jumping on the show. Friend of the program. For people who want to hear more from your Reign coverage, where can they read your stuff at? Or if they want to, for some reason, decide to check in on the Blue Jackets, where can you all be found on the internet?
So you can find my Reign stuff over at FPH Reign on Twitter, or you can find all my written work at fieldpasshockey.com. I cannot in good conscience recommend paying attention to the Blue Jackets this season, but if you want to, we are Locked On Blue Jackets wherever you find Locked On Kings. We are LO_Blue Jackets on Twitter, and if you would like to follow my personal account, which is mostly just yelling about how stupid this sport is, but also occasionally there are dog pictures and Star Wars opinions, then I am at _Jacob Forster, JAKOB FORSTER.
All right. Thank you for joining the show. And I bet that we're going to have you back on once we get to the, I hate to say it out loud, but playoffs. I don't want to jinx it, but playoffs. We'll talk with you then. All right. Thank you so much to Jay for hanging out with me and talking Reign. Again, if you missed our conversation from last week, you can go check that out. As we talked about the Reign, the power play, and much more. Come back tomorrow because we're going to talk about the Arizona Coyotes again, because the Kings are facing off against the Desert Dogs on Wednesday. So we're going to see what we've got in store for that game. So make sure you check it out. That is it for today. Thank you so much for listening. And make sure you come back tomorrow for more Kings news here on this show. You can find me on Twitter at RightSideSarah. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On LA Kings. Go give it a subscription, a follow, a whatever, so you make sure you never miss a future episode. Come back tomorrow, hear all about the Coyotes and whatever else happens in the world of the Kings here on Locked On Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.